Hi, my name is Rachel Freeman, and I will be talking about the new trade agreement that was created and passed by Donald Trump in September of 2018 and was finalized on October 1st, preceding the signing from Canada that was long awaited. This new trade agreement is called the United States, Mexico, and Canada Agreement, and it will be replacing NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. So there are two very large components in this new trade agreement. One of them would be the manufacturing and the import-export of cars and vehicles, and the Canadian dairy production being more open within the United States. So the first one was the cars and vehicles and the manufacturing. So a new rule is that 75% of the content of vehicles manufactured in North America will have to be sourced from North America to qualify for 0% of tariffs, which will be replacing the 62.5% that was required by NAFTA. Another part is 40% of the parts for any tariff-free vehicle must originate in high-wage factories, which pay their workers at least $16 an hour. And the high-wage requirement for the origin of parts used in the imported vehicles is important, but the penalty for importing vehicles that don't meet this target is a very, very small 2% tariff, or 2.5% tariff. So the problem is there are many manufacturing companies in Mexico, especially because they are very known for creating and exporting cars. They will most likely ignore this entire new rule because of how small the new tariff is. It will literally make a minimal impact on their manufacturing of cars, as they would much rather underpay their employees in order to make more money when selling their cars. And many U.S. labor leaders want to know how the Trump administration intends to enforce the agreement, as it sounds like they aren't going to be doing a very good job at it, which would cause plenty of scope for creative accounting if compliance is left up to these car companies. So just this fact that this new rule that was only raised, can't do math, 13% or 12.5% will make a very minimal impact on the manufacturing of cars that is imported into our country. Another problem with this is that Mexico depended heavily on China for many of the parts of these cars, and China had a very strong bond with North America, as we use them for various imports and exports. As you can look at most things in your house, and it will most likely say made in China, because they were the reason for most of our items. And so under the USMCA, it states that partners that are in the free trade deal, if they become partners with a non-market country such as China, the other two partners can get out in 6 months and then form their own bilateral partnership, which is very offensive for not only Mexico, who depends heavily on China, but also China, who they also make a lot of money from this, and their economy is flourishing because of our dependency on their imports. Like Wang Peng, which is a lecturer at a university in New China, stated that the agreement was the result of Trump purposely wanting to get back at China. So they're actually taking this quite personally, that we are no longer allowed to be in cahoots with China. Another man, I cannot read his name, but he's a freelance writer, and he wrote that Mexico and Canada were simply corpses that have been killed by the big bat of the U.S. trade war, and China should not have any sympathy towards them. So China truly feels that the U.S. is almost manipulating Mexico and Canada into this free trade agreement, when the only benefit that it's giving is to the United States and not the other two countries, especially the Mexican manufacturer companies who work way too entirely hard just to be pushed down with more rules, especially unnecessary rules that don't even help them in the end. And another quote from actually a Canadian dairy farmer, which is from the next component of this, says this is a really bad deal for Canadian dairy farmers. It really looks like there will be a long, painful death of supply management and maybe even the whole dairy sector. So the second part of this is the dairy production in Canada, which is actually like a huge part of the Canadian economy. And under the New Deal, Canada will offer the U.S. a greater access to its dairy market, which is actually quite harmful for the Canadian dairy farmers, and it almost feels like no one even asked them what they wanted in this, making it, or seeming like they are the biggest part in this dairy production. How ironic. Dairy farmers across Canada say that it will undercut their industry in Canada by limiting exports because of this new membership or partnership with the U.S. on the dairy production. Canadian dairy farmers stand to lose at least 3.9% of their market to U.S. producers under the new trade deal, as they have received new competitors because the dairy farm has conjoined with the U.S.'s dairy farm. And this new trade deal is replacing NAFTA, even though NAFTA, when it was implemented in 1994, it changed the economy, imports, exports, tariffs. It changed just trade in general within the North American countries completely. Trade in North America had tripled, and the U.S. trade deficit with Mexico and Canada had dramatically increased. So many people who were firm believers in NAFTA are so incredibly offended by the fact that it's being replaced by another Republican, even though the person who had created NAFTA was also a Republican, which is quite strange to me. Like Anna Swanson from New York Times quotes, "The demise of NAFTA, a deal that has knit together the North American economy over the last quarter century, would be a heavy blow to all three economies. As American farmers, restaurant workers, and some manufacturing employees will get hit hard if Trump pulls out NAFTA, because NAFTA did positively affect the economy and just this trade war between North America and the rest of the countries. And it almost seems like this new USMCA agreement has made it to where North America is cut off from any other country and any other need that they might possess in the future, especially from China, which has been very beneficial for our economy and for our manufacturing in Mexico and Canada. So I do not agree with this trade agreement. Prove me wrong.